Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my top 10 books that I read in 2020. So this list was super fun to try and create and also a bit difficult because I had a really good reading year, but I was able to narrow it down to 10 books. But I did want to say that I did start the Stormlight Archives in 2020 and I didn't want to include all of the Stormlight Archive books in the top 10, but I did rate all of them 5 stars other than Oathbringer, but I'm only including my favorite one that I've read this year. But before we go ahead and get on into the books, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new content. I post new videos every Sunday and Wednesday and sometimes Friday. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box for links to all of my social media, including my Discord and my Patreon. So these books are in order, starting at number 10 and going all the way up to my favorite book of 2020. So coming in at number 10 is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgkin Burnett. This is a children's classic, but this follows a girl named Mary, and she was living in India, and her parents get killed in an earthquake, and she ends up having to move back to England and move in with her uncle who has lost his wife and is grieving. And it's a very dark and dreary place, and Mary herself is very dark and dreary. She's never really been shown love or affection, and she finds the secret garden that was her aunt's, and she takes it upon herself with the help of some people around the manor to kind of bring this garden back to life. And it's very symbolic of her being brought back to life and the family of the manor being brought back to life. And I just thought that this book was charming and sweet, and I really loved the setting with the garden and the beautiful descriptions that the author chose to put in there. I just loved the theme of nature and what it can do for you, and how no matter what we go through in life, there's still hope at the end. And I think it's a book that someone of any age could read and get something out of, and it's one that I see myself rereading many times in the future. Coming in at number 9 is An Ember in the Ashes by Sapa Tahir. This is a YA fantasy, but this book follows a world that's very Roman-inspired. It's very dark, it's very brutal, it's very violent. We follow 2 different characters. The first one is Elias, who's part of this ruling militant class, and we follow a girl named Laya, who is part of the scholar kind of oppressed class. And Lyra ends up infiltrating this military school in order to spy for the resistance. And she ends up meeting Elias, their paths cross, and the story kind of goes from there. I really like the story because I felt like it grew so much with each book. So we're kind of given the basics in book 1, which is still engaging and interesting. And Sapa Tahir's writing is beautiful, but then with each book, the world is expanded so much. These characters grow so much. So many more layers are added to the story, and I just feel like it does a really good job of being a good, cohesive series. And book 1 does an awesome job of setting that up with these characters and their experiences and how they relate to one another and how we can really feel for them. So I had a lot of fun with this book. I think it's a great introduction to the series, and it's very fast-paced if you like fast-paced books. So definitely one of my favorite books of 2020. Coming in at number 8 is Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 in the First Law trilogy. I really like this book. It's my favorite out of the trilogy because of the quest trope. So all of our characters, Magnus, Jezzel, Pharaoh, Logan Ninefingers, all of these storylines have come together from book 1 into book 2, and they kind of have to go together on this quest to look for this thing. And they do not like each other. They're not friends. These people do not care about one another. They are not like, the Fellowship of the Ring. They can't stand one another, but somehow they have to work together to survive. I felt like that was a lot of fun to read about. It was definitely my favorite part of this whole entire trilogy. And I do feel like we see a different side to several of these characters in this book. Now, I can't say that they necessarily are changing as characters because I don't really think that they are, but most characters that Joe Abercrombie writes are multifaceted and they're very dynamic, so that we get to see different aspects of these characters, and I really enjoyed that. Coming in at number 7 is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This is an adult thriller, and it was the first thriller that I read in 2020 or ever, and it is loosely based off of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I read in 2019. But in this book, we follow a girl who is a nanny, and she ends up accepting a job nannying these children for this family. And they live kind of in the countryside. I think it's in Scotland. And the parents travel a lot for work, and they also own a smart home that is computerized, digitalized, it's linked to their phones, and as soon as our main character gets there, the parents leave, and all of these strange things start happening. So the house starts malfunctioning. She thinks that someone has gotten into the back door. She hears things, someone walking around upstairs where her room is. Not to mention the kids are not the best behaved. So at the beginning of the book, we learn that there was a murder and our main character is in jail and she is writing a letter telling what exactly happened. So the whole time we are kind of recounting the events that led up to this murder. And I just loved the creepiness of this book. It was so atmospheric. The whole time I didn't know if something paranormal was going on or something was just messing with our character. Definitely a book that I would recommend if you like thrillers, if you want to read a book around October, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Coming in at number 6 is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This is an adult science fiction book, but in this book we follow a girl named Rose, and when she was a child, she actually fell into a hole in the earth and landed in this giant metal hand. Fast forward several decades later, and Rose is actually a physicist who is investigating this hand, which is now been figured out is part of this massive robot named Themis, and she is investigating where this robot came from, how did it get here, did someone send it here, what are the implications with regards to alien life, and this book was just so fun. And it's written in interview format, so I thought that was really interesting. The audiobook for this is amazing, and I loved how not only was there science incorporated into this, but there's like geopolitical turmoil as all of these countries are trying to figure out who has rights to this gigantic metal robot. And also, can it be used as a weapon of mass destruction? So there's just a lot of questions surrounding that. So this book was a lot of fun. We have good character development. We have some politics. We have some sci-fi, and definitely a series that I will be revisiting in the future. Coming in at number 5 is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is book 2 in her villain series, and in this series we follow 2 different characters, Victor and Eli, and when they were in college they figured out a way to acquire superhero powers by having a near-death experience, and something happened between these 2 friends and they turned into enemies, and Victor went to jail for 10 years, and when he got out, Eli was still after him. And this kind of follows the events from book 1. The reason that I really liked Vengeful so much is that Victor is such a morally gray character. Like, there's something going on with him that I can't really tell you, obviously, but he has to do things that are just unscrupulous. They're not respectable, and he has to do them in order to survive, and that's just such an internal conflict. I just love reading about it. And then we have Eli, who you cannot trust, and then you have the government that employs Eli to help them find Victor so they can arrest him, and of course Eli has a vendetta against Victor, and it's just it's so good, and I cannot wait for book 3. I heard a rumor that there might be a book 3, but this is a series I can see like going on forever and ever and ever, but it's so good. Coming in at number 4 is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This is an adult contemporary romance, and it follows a girl named Kala who lives in Canada. She's a city girl. She ends up finding out that her father is really ill, so she flies to Alaska to see him, and she ends up meeting a pilot named Jonah, but then she learns that her father's illness is actually worse than anyone had thought, and she ends up staying and kind of rebuilding her relationship with her father. So this book, I don't read a lot of romance personally, and the reason that I wanted to pick it up is because I knew that it had like a subplot between Kala and her father, and it definitely delivered. This book had a really good romance. It had some really humorous parts. It had a really good friendship and really good side characters. The atmosphere of Alaska was extremely well done. I've never been there, but it made me want to go there. And the whole rebuilding the relationship between Kala and her father was just heartbreaking and touching and definitely contributed to the story. I feel like if this was just a romance, I wouldn't liked it nearly as much, but all of those elements of this book combined definitely made it one of my favorite books of the year, and I actually bought the sequel and cannot wait to read it. And coming in at number 7 is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This book, I feel like, doesn't get enough love. It doesn't get talked about nearly as much, and I do have a full spoiler for your review for this book, but this is such an important book to read if you're someone who really enjoys Stormlight Archives and Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. And having read this after I read Way of Kings, I feel like it just added so much more to the entire Brandon Sanderson's experience. And also, Warbreaker, the magic system in this is definitely my favorite out of all of the magic systems I've read so far. And we also have some really awesome female characters, two sisters named Vivenna and Ciri. And then we also have a god named Lightsong who is hilarious and adds so much humor to this book. And then we get other characters such as Vasher and Nightblood who actually reappear in some of Brandon Sanderson's other books. So this was just so fun to read in addition to his other Cosmere novels. And I really hope that Brandon decides to write more in this world because I will totally be here for it. And coming in at number 9 is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in the Stormlight Archives. The reason that I chose this book out of all of the books in the Stormlight Archives is because it is my favorite. I felt like Way of Kings really set up the different characters in the world, and this book, they all converged, which I really enjoyed. And I also enjoyed Shallan's storyline here because I feel like this is really where Shallan begins to shine, and we begin to learn more about her and how important she is to the story, and we kind of get more of the Knights Radiant and the development of the Knights Radiant. So I also really enjoyed Kaladin and Shallan's interaction in this book. I thought it was just hilarious. And also Shallan's interaction with Adolin. That was a lot of fun to read about as well. So it was really hard to choose my favorite Stormlight book, but I think I'm going to go with Words of Radiance just because when I think back about my reading experience, this one definitely was the most positive. And coming in at number 1 is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I was highly anticipating this book, and it definitely delivered. In this book, we follow a girl named Addie, and she was born in the 1700s, and in order to escape a marriage she doesn't want, she makes a deal with a demon, and he grants her immortality, but it comes with some consequences. Nobody remembers who Addie is. She can make no impact on the world, so she kind of just floats through life and has to deal with that. So this book follows several decades, 3 centuries actually, as Addie is learning to navigate this curse, deal with this demon, as well as finding ways to interact with people and make an impression on the world. I thought that this book was beautifully written. I loved the prose, and some of the situations that Addie found herself in were just heart-wrenching. She is definitely a strong, persistent character because she really had to go through a lot of tough stuff in order to get where she is. She's very smart and clever. She's able to manipulate the curse to make it work for her. And I also really liked the different themes that V.E. Schwab discussed in this book, even if it wasn't directly discussed. Things like, you know, if we have no impact on the world, do we even matter? Why were we created? Why do we exist? There's a lot of deep themes that can be derived from Addie's experiences in this story. So that's why I decided to give the number 1 spot to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. All right, you guys, so that is it for my top 10 books of 2020. Let me know in the comments some of your favorite books that you read last year, and I will see you guys soon in another video. Goodbye.